Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to Plant Delights Nursery. I'm Doug Ruhren, garden curator at Juniper Level Botanic Garden. The topic today is living mulch. It's maybe a little bit misleading, but what we are going to talk about are ground covers. Now, often when one mentions ground covers, gardeners scream in fear and run the other way. But I'm talking about small-scale ground covers, things that cover the ground. A lot of plants just form a distinct clump, and so there's spaces in between them. But if you're, and you're probably spreading mulch between those plants, but a plant that spreads out and covers the ground eliminates the need for mulch, and will do a pretty good job of preventing weeds starting from seed. So we're going to look at a few examples of plants that can be used in that manner. They're really good plants that I will show you today, but there are not the entirety of every plant that's useful. These are not things that you would use to cover a quarter acre or anything like that. But that's the kind of ground cover that most gardeners don't want. They don't want something to cover a quarter acre, because in that quarter acre they want 500 different plants. So we'll start right here. This is an ice plant. Ice plants fall into several genera. This is Delosperma. This is actually a species. We'll see some other examples. This is Delosperma nubigenum. The ice plants are sun plants. They need good drainage, so you have to take that into account. But you can grow bigger plants through it and let it fill out the gaps between plants. All right. This is one of our native phlox. The phlox are a big and very varied genus. This one is pretty much done. They're late winter, very early spring bloomers. This is Phlox subulata. They're evergreen, looking a bit like a juniper, but very effective ground cover, small scale ground cover. You can see there's other plants growing through it. All right. And you're welcome to ask questions as we go along. Various times make a good ground cover in sun. They need good drainage, not excessive drainage, just avoid a wet spot if you're growing times. This is this same genus as culinary times, but this is not one that's grown for kitchen use, but its Thymus Nicephii. It has a bit of a fragrance to it, but blooming this time of year for an extended period of time, and thyme are in the mint family, and that whole family is really good for pollinators. I'm surprised we don't see anything yet, but it's a cool gray morning, but I think before the end of the day it'll get covered with pollinators. This is another ice plant, Delosperma. With the one we saw, Delosperma nubigenum, it just blooms in the spring. Most of the ice plants we grow bloom pretty much all summer long. Well, it's far from being summer yet. It's just May, but they'll bloom up into the early fall when there's a hard frost. And this is a brand new cultivar. Delosperma dancing embers. Lovely sort of fiery orange red. And you know, that's the full size, full height. But you can use a low-growing ground cover in between the gaps between bigger plants like this penstemon or the yucca. Some sedums have a spreading habit, and so there are even, most sedums want sun, as this one does. This is sedum secotense. It's about to bloom, well, it's starting to bloom, yellow flowers. Sedums are highly favored by pollinators. I don't know this one too well, but we're going to see two other sedums that I know well and I really think are top-rate small-scale ground covers. All right. In a really dry spot, you could use one of the prickly pears as a ground cover, but one that you have to be careful weeding around. This is Mesa melon. We have 16-inch long needle nose pliers that are useful for weeding amongst them, but not the best of small-scale ground covers, but lovely today. Some of the dianthus, especially the plumarias types, bloom for 6 weeks this time of year. There's some modern selections that bloom repeatedly, but they're evergreen plants, so they cover the ground year-round. And when this is done blooming, we'll cut all the flowers off, and it has this beautiful blue-gray foliage through the entire year. Another really good small-scale ground cover. Going to continue into the edge of the shade garden. Oh, well, we'll stop. This is Delosperma cooperi, which is an oldie but goodie. This one's been around for, you know, we've grown this in gardens for 30, maybe 40 years. And it's just a wild species, but it blooms almost all summer long. Now the ground covers we've seen thus far have been for full sun locations. There's quite a few small-scale ground covers for shade, and this one is a native. It's green and gold is a common name. It's Chrysogonum. Now they used to all be Chrysogonum virginianum. The taxonomists have divided the species into several species, and so this is now Chrysogonum repens, Quinn's gold. Repens means creeping, and this is a somewhat creeping form. If you want green and gold as a ground cover for a good size area, there's a selection called ECO, lacquered spider. It spreads really fast. This one spreads at a very modest rate, so it's easy to use amongst other neighbors. And here it's weaving through some trilliums and a hosta and a bit of a fern. And green and gold is maybe not ever like a showstopper, but it's in bloom for many months, so it more than earns its keep, and it's also evergreen. This ground cover is a plant with several fairly misleading common names. The scientific name is Saxifraga stolonifera. Stolons are an above ground stem. You know, this has a stolon just like strawberries. If you've ever grown strawberries, you know they send out a lot of runners, or like the house plant, spider plant does long runners like that. And this will eventually settle down and root in and put up foliage. But Saxifraga stolonifera meaning to bear stolons. Its common name are strawberry geranium or strawberry begonia. It's related to neither one of those plants, but the foliage is, I guess to somebody's eye, somewhat like those two plants. It's a evergreen foliage plant. This is a selection with nice sort of burgundy marking in the leaf, so it's a showy plant year-round. It's going a little bit past its big spring bloom, but my goodness, it's just thick with bloom over there. In colder climates, it's often grown as a house plant, but it's fully winter hardy in zone 7. Now, ferns are extremely varied. You know, some are clump formers, others are spreaders, some are, you know, get really tall. In a temperate climate, the largest ferns, you know, 5 foot tall is about the limit on ferns that are hardy in a temperate climate. Of course, in the tropics, ferns, well, they're even tree ferns, but there are a number of small-scale spreading ferns that could be used as a ground cover. This is one of the maidenhair ferns, Adiantum fimbriatum. Do you see that? Well, I don't know the story behind its cultivar name. It's he. There's stories behind these common names. Here's a really lovely little ground cover. It's maybe almost 2 inches tall. Not very good for casting shade in the garden, but Laurentia fluviatilis. Common name is blue star. And Lord, it's already been blooming for 6 weeks, two months, I don't know, and it'll bloom pretty much all summer. In the heat of the summer, its bloom is probably not quite as heavy, but it's a little evergreen ground cover. You see, this is exactly what I was suggesting, that how to use these small ones, just sort of as the matrix in between other things. We have, you know, lovely epimedium. What is that one? Amber something or another? Amber Queen, still blooming fairly nicely. And a Lychnis and a fern and euphorbia and hostas. It just provides a living mulch between these plants that adds, it's much more interesting than looking at an actual mulch itself. So Laurentia fluviatilis, blue star. Its rate of growth, spread is, I don't know, maybe about a foot a year or so. You'll never, be overwhelmed by it like if you planted a full-size English ivy or something. Oh, well, maybe a little bit bigger than what our focus is on today, but this is a raspberry that's grown as an evergreen ground cover. And it's blooming today. It does have fruit that are edible, but not necessarily high quality fruit. But as I mentioned, evergreen. It's Rubus pentalobus, meaning 5 lobes to the leaf. It's not as rampant as something like English ivy or Vinca major, but it's a good sort of medium scale evergreen ground cover.
Like some honey from the beehives here.
Now, I often don't feel that I really know a plant unless I've experienced it for a number of years. But this sedum palmeri from Mexico, it never has a bad day. It's fully evergreen. But the foliage takes on some lovely red tints in the cold weather. Has yellow flowers. It's actually done blooming already. But the foliage is this sort of celadon green all through the rest of the year. And its rate of spread is very modest. And as a matter of fact, you might, if you wanted a lot of it, you can dig up pieces and spread it out further. But handsome plant year-round. Here, growing through the buffalo gourd, which is just returning from the underground tuber. Now, you should have seen this last week. Gardeners always say such a thing. This is Mazis reptans. It's full size, real small scale ground cover. Little, somewhat like a snapdragon flower. There's also a white form of it, but I don't even know if it's an inch tall, but evergreen, covering the ground, and its peak of bloom is over, but it'll have a smattering of flowers through the summer months. But you could easily cover the ground between bigger plants. And you see where it's growing, we don't need to mulch, so it replaces mulch. And it's doing all sorts of good things like photosynthesizing and providing food to pollinators. Brightly colorful ground cover, Lysimachia congestiflora Persian chocolate, grown mostly for its colorful foliage, but it'll have a showy display of yellow flowers. Some of the Veronicas are low growing and spreading. This is Veronica Blue Spirit. You see the foliage is under 2 inches tall, but spikes of flowers up above the foliage. The foliage is evergreen, so it's present year-round. And another sedum I highly recommend as a small-scale ground cover is sedum tetractinum. This is a selection called Little China. It's evergreen, but in the winter the foliage turns a lovely sort of coppery brown color. It's in full bloom now. It's blooming just this time of year, but the foliage is handsome the rest of the year. And it's another sedum that looks good all year round. And so the idea is these are plants that carpet the ground, eliminating the need for mulch, and also doing a fairly good job of suppressing weeds. I don't see any weeds coming up through this. I see some, we don't have any weeds here at Plant Delights Nursery or Juniper Level Botanic Garden. But we planted a weed here just for the purpose of this class, but to show you that weeds are growing in the bare earth here, but they're not growing through the sedum. I lie a lot, but so the idea is don't be afraid of spreading plants. These plants that spread at a very modest rate are useful in the garden for filling in the gaps between bigger things, and can also be labor savers in the garden. Were there any questions from the audience before we? conclude? Okay. Well, thank you very much for attending today.